Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Luke with Luke F1 Fantasy. Back at you with another video. This one being my Canada final thoughts video following free practice 1 and free practice 2. So we will get into a review of that shortly here, but we have a little bit to talk about. Today. It was going to be a pretty easy weekend, though we hoped. One transfer in, Nico Hulkenberg, sticking with Ferrari, rolling 3 into Austria and seeing how things shake out. But thanks to Charles's dunking it into the barrier in free practice 1 after 9 or so laps, I believe, wasn't able to partake in free practice 2. So we don't have the greatest of data on Ferrari, which meaning that we might need to look into a second constructor. But obviously all to play for in free practice 3 tomorrow's, and of course waiting for the sims from our friends over at f1fantasytools.com to see how things shake out. But let's look into the results then. So in free practice 1, always a little bit of a feeler, not much to report. No, not too much data to report from this. We had a lot of traffic. There was a lot of, being a sort of a hybrid track, streets, dedicated track. Definitely a few of the drivers were experiencing low grip out there. Colapinto, Hamilton spinning in turn 10. We had, even Oscar and Lando struggling to find some grip. Kimi and Lotte, Russell was on the grass. There was quite a few things happening. A lot of traffic as well. A lot of cars sort of like jotting positions. That kind of affected some drivers' laps. Surprised there wasn't more steward inquiries into some of these things that were happening. It looked a bit dicey at times, but it seems like they all were happy with what went on. But we have Max topping the top at 113.1, followed by the Williams. Williams just had a really good Friday. They are bouncing. They are very happy with where they have the car set up right now. So exciting to look for them. It's just a shame that they are not really in our plans from a budget building perspective, seeing as they need the most points this week for 8.6. But yeah, sometimes just too bad with how the algorithm is working this week. And as predicted, everyone was kind of thinking, like, knowing how good Mercedes were here last year in Canada, George getting on pole. It is not a surprise to see Mercedes doing well. And George seems to like this track. Lewis, respectively, in the Ferrari in 5th. The Racing Bulls and Hadjar and Lawson in the top 10. Lando and Oscar finished sort of 7th and 14th in FP1. I believe they were trialing some new upgrades, selling a new wing. It's not a wing that they're thinking about running for the race. So it kind of explains why they're a little bit low and just kind of doing some testing, but still nonetheless, quite competitive with the other teams, with Lando only being 4/10 off Max's time there. And then some of our normal back markers in the back, with Colapinto sort of like bringing up the rear here in 19th. Bortoleto sort of outperforming him in both sessions. So pay attention to that. And then going into free practice 2, where we had free practice 2 typically being more reflective of the race pace, a little bit longer. Teams sort of like still decided to run soft tires mainly. A few teams ran the mediums, with most teams reporting that the soft and the medium tires being quite similar in performance, which is actually quite key when you consider that it's the C4, C5, C6 tires, so kind of like the 3 softest tire compounds that Pirelli has. In C6, you would typically think that would be the one that'd be bolting on for qualifying, being the quickest. Obviously, the tire that has the most wear, the quickest wear to it as well. So, if those tires are holding up and they're just, performing just as good as the C5, we may see teams holding that C5 on for like their final qualifying or even the race as well. So that will kind of put things, in perspective for teams that are pretty good at looking after their tires, like McLaren, or drivers that tend to look after their tires a little bit better, like Charles. It may give them an advantage. Especially with Charles having not really done any sort of other runs today. So he's going to be sitting on quite a few sets of fresh tires that he may be able to take advantage of, certainly in qualifying, to kind of get him up there. as well as potentially in the race as well, which if you do qualify well at Canada, being a low DNF track, there is a chance that, if you qualify well, you may end up finishing in that position too. Yeah, those are certainly some of the sort of the thoughts. And I just wanted to bring your attention to this. Look at the top 7 in free practice. We have George in the Mercedes, Lando in the McLaren Mercedes, Kimi in the Mercedes, Albon in the Williams Mercedes, Fernando, Aston Mercedes, Oscar, Mercedes. 7 out of the top 8 are all Mercedes-powered cars. So Mercedes-powered cars definitely are in love with Canada track as of free practice 2. So if we are thinking about jumping off Ferrari into Mercedes, it's kind of staring us in the face that we need to consider what this looks like tomorrow. So roll on free practice 3, roll on getting the sims, and let's see what happens. Now, Lawrence Bortoleto has released his practice debrief, as he normally does. So just released over an hour ago. And, again, sort of like his analysis sort of revealing that, Mercedes just do really well in slightly cooler temperatures. So they are performing quite well at this Canadian track here. Obviously, some teams were sort of mixing up a little bit. Red Bull changing the setup of their car from Friday to free practice 1 to free practice 2. Max reporting that he's not as comfortable in it in free practice 2, but they still felt quite comfortable where they'd had the car at in free practice 1. So, definitely keep an eye out for them, which kind of falls into where F1.com are sort of putting things out. They're still thinking McLaren has the best race pace, not too far off from Red Bull. Mercedes in 3rd, Ferrari kind of lagging, sort of almost 3 tenths behind. And then we have sort of obviously a big gap, Williams, Aston, the Racing Bulls, and so forth. Still believing that McLaren are the team to beat, and looking at it's actually a new graph. I don't think I've seen this one in this article from Lawrence before, but the qualifying simulation pace range. So kind of potentially giving us the window of opportunity there would be for each of the teams. So interestingly, Red Bull have the highest factor for qualifying, but obviously the biggest differential out of the top 4 teams, potentially due to Yuki's performance in that car too. But obviously Mercedes and McLaren being very close. So this is going to be a really tight field. Actually, just wanted to go back to free practice 2. If you look at the gap between the first and all the way down to 17th with Esteban Ocon, it's literally a second. A second separates basically like the entire field, with actually Colapinto being at 1.7. Like, he's actually lagging quite behind. So again, another reason where we may be thinking the week of the Big Brother vote out of who are you bringing into your team. Who into your team are you bringing in Nico for? It seems as if Colapinto is struggling to make a case for himself, so he may be getting voted out of the house very soon. Looking into the weather then, like, things are looking pretty good, like no real major chance of rain. Things are going to be in the low 20s, sunny, dry, which makes a huge difference from the rain and wet and the chaos of Canada 2024, where we saw 5 DNFs. So, I think all things being equal, the weather looks like it shouldn't be too much of an issue for us, for our considerations. So what does that mean for our teams then? And obviously, this is what we are all here for, to take a look at what we're going to do. So here's my team 1. As you know, this is the template team, so to speak, as of right now. So I think, first and foremost, really the one transfer that's definitely going to be made is the Nico Hulkenberg transfer in. And certainly if I was to make that decision based on today's performance, I'd be taking Colapinto out, and I'd be running with the Nico Hulkenberg build. And I probably still would be quite happy with that. I think, obviously these results are showing us that, Ferrari, the data fully isn't really there because we just don't really know where Charles is. But if we have Lewis finishing like 5th and 8th in free practice 1 and free practice 2, and knowing that Charles is definitely more familiar with that car, typically tends to be a little bit better in times to Lewis. Like, you can probably say that probably Charles is maybe somewhat in that top 5 category, maybe top 6. So if you put them in the mix, it does again sort of filter out the points again. Like maybe that's a little bit more points coming to Ferrari than it would do to, say, Mercedes potentially. So kind of looking ahead to batches 3 and seeing, okay, what would kind of make me want to make this change from Ferrari to Mercedes? I think it definitely has to be, George and Kimi both outperforming the Ferrari. So definitely George finishing ahead of Charles and Lewis, and Kimi, if not ahead of Charles, definitely ahead of Lewis. So if that does happen, then I do kind of see the benefits, especially as you can see, like Mercedes powered engines just seem to be really great around Canada, that maybe this is the differential this week. Now going into the budget builder, can they increase in budget? Well, they do need 55 for a 0.3, which is a huge difference between them and Ferrari, like almost like 80 points difference. But if they are going to kind of squeeze out maybe 10 to 15 more points than Mercedes, so if Mercedes are going to squeeze out potentially 10 to 15 more points than Ferrari, if they do sort of what we think they're going to do, then I do think it's worth a consideration. And if we jump into the statistics for the constructors, when we look at the fantasy points that the second constructor sort of gets in a given week, generally it tends to be over 55. That's 1 week in Japan where it's 56, but generally 55 is doable if you do grab a pole with one of those, with a driver from that team, as well as get another one into the top 5, top 6. It is doable. So obviously from the budget builder, it looks like it's such a huge difference, and the no-brainer would be to stick with Ferrari. But it'd be interesting to see what the difference, or what the split is between the two come deadline lock-in. But I do see, if things continue as the way they are, that I could see some people jumping off the Ferrari builder into the Mercedes. And I don't think that would be a bad option too. So let's think, what other differentials can we have then? Well, going on the practice debrief, if Max is looking like he could be potential, it just sort of depends on what your team lineup is, because you kind of need to make more than 2 transfers in order to sort of make it happen. So I believe, well, let's see, because to make it happen, you're going to have to take Ferrari out to kind of gain the budget, which means that you're going to prop your constructor down to, let's see if I can start off with a Racing Bulls build. So that's going to leave me 25.5. And yeah, I could do the Colapinto and put in the Max build. And if we think Max can take pole, again, being a low DNF track, can he stick it to the win from there? Seeing as how he finished the last race in Spain, I could see him having extra motivation. So that actually might not be a bad differential team to go with. Again, maybe if I'm going with a team like this, I would put my DRS on Max if I was to do that. But that actually doesn't look like a bad team. You are kind of running the risk with the triple red Racing Bulls, so there is that to consider. But we've seen in previous weeks that a triple B tier build can actually be quite productive and quite competitive to the meta team. As long as this A tier driver that you pick gets a podium, it tends to generally work out quite even with that type of teams. And especially if Hadjar and Lawson look like they are strong performances for sort of top 10 finishes, potentially with a good race pace, get some overtakes, then I do think from a points and budget perspective, it's not too bad. Let me just check that. What about Verstappen? Where's his things at? Yeah, you see, that's where it gets a little bit dicey in terms of Verstappen. Like, he needs 71 for a 0.3, and that's probably not doable on a non-sprint weekend. So 45 is sometimes the max that, when you consider 10 for a pole, 25 for a win, plus 10 for a driver of the day or fastest lap. Like 45 tends to be a stretch. So, I do think it could be one that you look at from a points perspective, but I think you kind of lose a bit of budget from Verstappen. Maybe it means that you kind of have to hold him for another week, which means you're running this team for 2 weeks in a row, which you may not necessarily want to do. I mean, the other option is actually I was listening to Peter Windsor's analysis of FP1 and FP2, and actually he was quite favourable talking about Lando and Lando's driving style, coming out of turn 1, turn 2. He seemed to sort of report that Lando's looking a lot more comfortable than Oscar is potentially at this moment in time. And so that might be the other place that you look to see if you can squeeze in sort of a Lando, again, with a 2 transfers type move with my budget. I can't get there with the Racing Bulls, but I could get there with a Kick Sauber type of build, that we've kind of seen this run before. So again, this team has that potential to sort of get you the points, but I don't really know that McLaren are looking as dominant for a 1-2 finish as in previous races. You've kind of got George hanging around, you've got Max hanging around, so that would be the sort of the risk with this one. I don't know if we want to drop off the 2A constructor build this week with McLaren looking a lot more closer to the field, again, especially with all these Mercedes power units that are just, just dominating in Canada. So, I might be looking at the situation that maybe the best strategy is to sort of split your bets among as many sort of Mercedes assets that you can. So, obviously we still want. Obviously, there's 2 other builds that I have with Lando and Max. You don't really get to fit Nico in, so I think you're kind of losing to the field if you don't put Nico in this week. I think that 0.6 budget increase is just staring us in the face that I think Nico has to come in, which means that to kind of bring in some of that double A-tier driver, you're going to have to take a -10 or potentially use a wild card to do it. So, that would kind of give you pause for thought. And if you thought you were going to run that team template for a couple of weeks, it's probably worth it. But if you're just going to sort of change out of it next week, then I think it may be best to sort of avoid that type of situation. Similarly, like obviously I could do a similar thing where I decide to, just kind of swap out a Oscar for Lando. Maybe I look at this if Oscar continues to, if Oscar, don't know why he wouldn't turn it on tomorrow, but let's say he doesn't even sort of touch the top 5 in FP3, that maybe I might consider throwing Lando into the team, putting the 2X on him, sort of running this type of team. Again, it'll take me a -3 to get there, so I'd kind of want to see the other side of things where I see Mercedes being like, again, super dominant and that they are, definitely outperforming the Ferrari, maybe Max as well. So we kind of need to see. So basically, what I'm thinking is we kind of need to see a lot of things happen to move off Oscar. So I think Oscar still remains a strong performer, and really it's kind of coming to whether we are making that decision from Ferrari to Mercedes. But yeah, I think looking at some of the data and seeing how strong Mercedes look, it might be worth taking those 2 transfers this week and going with this type of route. And so, yeah, you have to kind of consider where your budget is as well. Like mine is kind of on the higher end. It's not the highest, but I'm at 115 million. And with, say, like the template build, as we call it. So, Oscar's going to get a 0.3. Isaac, we hope, is going to get 0.6 for 0.9. Liam, hopefully, is going to get another 0.6. That's 1.5. Looking at Hulkenberg coming in for 0.6, gets 2.1 for the other spot with Bortoleto, who has a decent chance to maybe get a 0.2. So what does that put us at? That's like 2.4. Am I at 6, 1, 2, 1.8, 2.1, 2. Let's call it 2.3, and then kind of going with our constructors of McLaren, which goes to 0.3. So 2.6, and what have I got left for Mercedes or Ferrari? So let's just call them a 0.3. So this kind of team can kind of get us 2.7 million, which kind of puts me into 117.7, and that's actually a really good budget increase for this week. So there is a lot to like about just sort of sticking with, even if you kind of stuck with the Ferrari. There is a good points potential. There's good budget potential. There's nothing too wrong with this team. It's just whether you want to take that risk and go in the Mercedes. And I'm kind of wanting to maybe go a little bit different. I'm going to say yes. I think I'm going to look to squeeze Ferrari in, or I wouldn't feel bad to sort of use that second transfer to put it in. Is probably the better way of saying it. So let's look ahead to free practice 3 and see what the sims say when they come out. But we will have some things to talk about then for sure. So I will post my team on X just before lock-in. If you have some questions and thoughts down below, please comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Find me on Twitter as well if you have any questions. Bit busy in the morning with family commitments, but we will be watching qualifying. I think I'll miss free practice 3 because I'll be out, but I will get to those results when I get back. So thanks again for watching, guys. Appreciate the support this week on the channel. Enjoy the race, and next time we'll see you will be a preview for the next race in Austria. Otherwise, enjoy the race. Thank you. Bye.